Bob Pioli's story begins the way so many great American stories do, with immigrants chasing a better life. His parents came to the United States from Italy after World War I, settling in Niagara Falls, New York. They didn't speak English and they didn't have much money, but they had a family, and Bob and his brother learned the language on their own, finding their footing in a new country. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December of 1941, Bob didn't hesitate. He volunteered for the draft and joined the U.S. Army Air Corps, becoming a commissioned officer and a bombardier on a B-17 bomber.
In the Army, he was a bombardier for a B-17, so he would essentially drop the bombs whenever the time was right. But that's a pretty big job for somebody to have.
Bob flew 8 missions over Europe. One of the most significant was a follow-up raid on Ploiești, Romania, Germany's main source of oil. A previous wave of B-24 bombers had been decimated in a low-level attack. Bob's crew went back to finish the job. He was shot down on his 8th mission on April 13, 1944.
He flew 8 missions. I think he got shot down on his eighth mission. In his book, he mentioned that they faced a lot of resistance, whether it be anti-aircraft, enemy aircraft. It had a lot of eyes on it. It had a big implication for the war.
Bob was taken prisoner and eventually sent to Stalag Luft III, the same camp made famous by the Great Escape, where dozens of Allied prisoners tunneled their way out. When the Russians began closing in on Poland in January of 1945, the Germans forced the prisoners to march in the dead of winter to a camp just north of Munich. Bob had kept a journal of his time as an airman and a POW. On that march, he burned it to stay warm. He was held captive for 18 months. On April 29, 1945, General Patton's Armored Division rolled through the gates and set him free.
General Patton's Armored Division came in, basically steamrolled through the gate, and that was that. The Americans showed up, but it was a really long journey after the liberation. The liberation isn't, a whole story of this is, everything's great now. It was more of a, okay, we're a little better off. We're a lot better off than we were, but we still have some obstacles in our way.
Coming home wasn't easy. Bob returned to an America that had largely been spared the physical destruction of war, and the contrast was jarring.
So going from years of rubble and bombs going off and constant danger to coming back here and seeing everybody just going about their lives. In his book, he said something along the lines of, how do these people live like this? Do they not know what's going on over there?
Bob rebuilt his life. He earned a degree from Purdue University, married his wife in 1949, and went to work for Union Carbide. This career eventually brought him to Marietta, Ohio in 1976. He and his wife were together until his death in February of 2019. In his later years, Bob made it his mission to share what he had lived through, speaking at schools across the Mid-Ohio Valley, from Marietta High School to middle schools in Parkersburg.
He was one of the most open people about his experience in the war that I've met, because a lot of people kind of are closed off about it, but he was pretty open about it, and I think a lot of people learned a lot from him for that.
His grandson, Matt McCarthy, says Bob's legacy goes beyond the battlefield, rooted in a resilience forged through one of history's darkest chapters.
I think just a legacy of resilience. Going through what he went through, you have to have a certain amount of resiliency and mental strength on top of the physical strength to endure those kinds of conditions and endure that, traumatic event. I would say just a legacy of bravery and resiliency to overcome any kind of obstacle or any kind of challenge that gets thrown your way, no matter how hard.
That resilience showed up not just in wartime, but in the quiet, everyday moments of family life. McCarthy recalls a phone call after his first car accident as a teenager. He expected a lecture. Instead, Bob offered something more lasting.
But he called me up and he goes, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" He goes, "Oh, I heard about your wreck. You're getting a little older. You gotta start taking care of yourself a little better here. All right, don't worry about it. You're all right, and that's what's most important." For me, it was one of those lifelong lessons that I'll I'll never forget, and I'll try to teach to my kids and hopefully their kids, you know?
As America marks 250 years, McCarthy says his grandfather's story carries a message that feels more relevant than ever.
If one person can go through all that, the deadliest conflict in human history, and come away from it a caring and compassionate individual, I don't see why we can't take a page from that book. He saw the worst, and yet he somehow came out of it more understanding and more compassionate and willing to listen to everybody's story and listen to everybody's side. I think we can all learn a lesson from that, especially with everything going on around us right now.